Yo, what's shaking, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of the Orange Bloods Texas Football Channel. I'm Jeff Ketch, that's Anwar Richardson. It's a Monday overreaction show brought to you by RogueShop.com, our favorite sponsor. I hate to say that, but it's the only sponsor that helps me sleep at night. It helps joints and pains. It helps me feel good in the middle of the day. They always have special offers just for the viewers and just for the subscribers at orangebloods.com. Go to RogueShop.com, get you a pen, get you some gummies, get you some salve, get you some herb, get whatever it is that you want and desire. They will take care of you and make sure that your Monday and Tuesday and Wednesdays and Thursdays, Fridays, Saturday, and Sundays, for that matter, are great days and the best that they can be. Anwar, it's time for some overreactions. I feel like a week ago, we didn't really have as much of an overreaction show as we just had a Monday post scrimmage show. Yeah. So my question coming out of the gate, and by the way, make sure you like the channel, comment, hit the like button, do all that stuff we normally ask you. Any obvious overreaction for you coming out of the Texas spring game on Saturday?
Yeah, I mean, I think the obvious one for me, Ketch, is kind of something I've talked about before, which is, it speaks volumes to me that Quinn Ewers has been on campus since January, and we are still talking about him in the same breath as a guy who's been on campus for 3 years. I think it's not as much about Hudson, but speaks volumes to the progression of Quinn, and just thinking about wherever he was, we've seen him in the spring game, and whatever been able to see, as a guy who really hasn't played since his junior year in high school, where you see some of the errors and you see some of the things, but you also saw the potential of what could be, especially with the deep ball, a pass that you've talked about for years as far as his touch and ability. I just think, Ketch, that for us to be talking about a guy who hasn't really played a ton of football, being the franchise and showing some potential, like it's clearly like on the Anthony Cook interception, like he didn't see Anthony Cook, you can tell from that. But being able to see some of the other things, Ketch, you just look at it, you tell yourself, man, if this offensive line could somehow find a way to keep this guy upright and just not have him getting creamed, man, Quinn Ewers could have a good season. I'm not saying great. I'm not saying, what you would probably define, Ketch, of what this team needs. I think you put in your 10 thoughts of the weekend, probably top 2 to 3 as far as, quarterback. Was it efficiency? Was the number that you kind of put in there, Ketch? Or
I did, but I think even talking more vague than that, just like the eyeball, if he can be one of the top, if Texas can have one of the top 3 to 4 quarterback situations in the Big 12 this year, that'll go a long way, I think, towards this team being good. If they can get that, it then puts the pressure on the other areas of concern on this team to get better, to kind of answer their questions the same way that Quinn would be answering the quarterback position. But I don't think they need anything crazy.
Yeah.
But they do need that.
Yeah. And it's interesting, Ketch, because one of the things I want to ask you about, so that's kind of my overreaction, and one of the things you kind of outlined in your column, what I thought was really interesting, is you kind of gave like what would be acceptable for like year one, and you kind of use a Casey Thompson comparison when healthy. If Texas can get these kind of numbers or something similar from Quinn, we start talking about the game changer as far as increasing in wins and having a more successful season. So anyway, that's kind of, I'll start there. That's kind of like my big overreaction is, as I still think about it over the weekend, Quinn being in the mix heavy for a guy that we think probably will take over really speaks volumes to who he is, the rating system, like everything as relates to the young man.
I think I stressed when we did our video Saturday night after the spring game, when I wrote my column Saturday night, when I wrote my column on Sunday, you got to be careful, I think, to overreact of such a small sample size. I do feel like a lot of people have made determinations about what this team can be based off of a very small glimpse of it on Saturday. That being said, this was a 5-7 football team. And I think just eyeballing the team on Saturday, and granted, Bijan Robinson didn't play. Xavier Worthy was on a pitch count. It's still a program that, to me, isn't good. This isn't a good team yet. And good is subjective, right? I mean, if you're telling me 7-5 is good, I probably, okay, well, then they're good. But if good is 9-3, I don't see a 9-3 team yet. And that doesn't feel like an overreaction. It's an acknowledgement that just 5 months ago, this team finished off a 5-7 season. And the things that plagued the program a year ago are still, I think, areas of the football team that need improvement, right? I mean, we know the number one offensive line class in the country is on its way this summer. There's still no getting around the fact that if you just watch this team on Saturday and see what it has available to it in terms of offensive linemen, I'm not so sure that Hayden Conner is not the best offensive lineman that the team has as it currently is situated. And I don't know what that means. I don't know what it means that I look at Junior Angelau and Jake Majors and don't quite see them taking the step from solid to anchors of an offensive line that can, help a team compete for a Big 12 championship. And I think you look all over the field, if you ignore the skill positions for just a moment, just for conversation's sake, it's still a team that has a lot of work to do. And I think if you're Steve Sarkisian, you know that. I think if you're the coaching staff, you know that. I think you feel good that you still have another 4 months to kind of make this thing more cohesive. But on a Saturday night eyeball test standpoint, I thought we were looking at an also-ran in the Big 12 in 2022. The question becomes, how good can they get, I think, by the end of this season? And what kind of springboard is that for Sark's third season, which might be the last year you get with Quinn Ewers? I mean, he seems to be a guy that wants to get in and get out as soon as possible. And if he's as good of a talent as everybody thinks he is, maybe that's possible. It just makes for an interesting window of what we're looking for. This is the last year with Bijan. Next year is the last year of Xavier Worthy. At some point, this thing has to turn a corner. And I find myself wondering when it's going to be. I don't have a good answer for that yet.
Well, Ketch, I want to do something here because, I really, for those who aren't subscribers of Orange Bloods, Ketch and I, write columns every Sunday. I do the Sunday Pulpit. He does 10 Thoughts for the Weekend. To my knowledge, I think we're the only people in the market that actually do a consistent Sunday column. So we still hold on to some of the old school, journalism things where Sunday used to be, your column thing. Ketch, you outlined something, though, at the beginning of your column that I would love for us to talk about here. If we can talk ourselves into Texas making the jump, right? And listen, and let's fully acknowledge going from 5 to 10 wins is an incredible jump, all right? I mean, you use the word progress. Going from 5 to 7 or 8, that's progress, right? Now, you can debate like how much progress is that really? But no matter what, it's progress. Tom Herman, Ketch, went from 7-6 in year one, 6-6, to the following year getting to 9 wins and then 10 wins in the bowl game. But they also got to the Big 12 championship and then got to the Sugar Bowl victory, which ended up being the highlight there. How could we talk ourselves into saying, okay, Tom Herman did that. Okay, Steve Sarkisian in year 2, what would you need to see? And I thought you perfectly outlined, I think, about 7 or 8 things in your column that you thought, okay, if these things happen, this could be the byproduct. Yeah. Let's talk fantasy world for a second. What would you want to see? And like I said, if you guys aren't on Orange Bloods, it was one of the many really good nuggets from Ketch's column on Sunday.
It's interesting that you brought that up because I wanted to have a conversation about what still needs to happen and paint it in a way where it feels positive as opposed to harping on these things that Texas doesn't have. But if you're talking about how it was 6 things, 6 steps that can get Texas to the Big 12 title game, we mentioned one. Quarterback play just has to be in the top 3 or 4 in the conference. I looked a year ago, 4 quarterbacks were, so you had 2 quarterbacks that made first team all Big 12, second team all Big 12. And then you had a couple of quarterbacks that made an honorable mention. If I'm not mistaken, it was Spencer Sanders, Brock Purdy, Jerry Bohannon at Baylor, and Caleb Johnson at Oklahoma. Or Caleb Williams, excuse me. You need to have quarterback play that's kind of in the Jerry Bohannon range, to be completely honest. I think number 2, you're going to have 2 of these freshman offensive linemen step up and play at freshman All-America level honors. And it's kind of a tricky ask because what you've got is a bunch of Texas fans. And I'm curious, I want your thoughts specifically on this, Anwar. Alex has been doing the deep dig stuff for 8 years now, since I think going back to 2015. And in that time, only one true freshman offensive lineman has ever really been pretty good in year 1.
That's my man, Zach Shackelford, right?
Connor Williams.
Oh, okay.
In year 1 was a really good player for Texas. Like, surprisingly, if you'll remember when it happened, it was like this guy was a revelation just because he wasn't quite as hyped up, nowhere near as hyped up as a Kelvin Banks or a DJ Campbell or some of the other guys that are coming into the program. But it's not an easy thing to do to have a guy show up for his first practice in August and then on the run have that guy very quickly turn into a strength on your offensive line. Texas A&M was able to do it a year ago when Bryce Foster and Reuben Feathery both showed up and were instant contributors on a good offensive line that had other good players on it. I think Texas, in order for Texas to get to a Big 12 championship game this year, they absolutely need Kelvin Banks and probably DJ Campbell to emerge as good starters on this offensive line and not just guys that are being forced to play because there's nobody else of quality. Texas fans will point to the A&M guys and say, they did it a year ago. We should be able to do it this year. My brain tells me, well, that's not how math works. Like, if something's really hard to accomplish and somebody does it, it doesn't mean that it makes it easier for the next person to do it. It just means that, you recognize the statistical anomaly in front of you, and now you're trying to break that. How confident are you of this thing that has to happen, which is, it feels like if Kelvin Banks and Campbell don't show up and play really well right away, a big part of the plan by this coaching staff will have backfired a little bit. They haven't gone after portal offensive linemen. They are pointing towards, we're going to get better up front on high school football recruiting alone without the time it usually takes for those players to get good in normal circumstances, i.e. a couple of years to develop.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough, Ketch, because like you said, it's easy to point to the anomalies and say, like, see, that happened. And it's like, there's a reason why Disney movies are made, right? Because it's the one time, a couple of times that it happens. So it's a tough ask, Ketch, when you start talking about having guys get here in the summer, and then having a staff to figure out, okay, which guys are going to be the guys that I feel like are going to be in the starting lineup. Usually that kind of stuff and situation really isn't finalized until about like 2 weeks into training camp. It's usually around the time when you figure out, okay, these are my starters. So you can have like the last 2 weeks to really start preparing for the season opener. So when you start talking about, mixing and matching and trying to figure things out and then get to the, okay, now, all right, guys, now you got 2 weeks. And, from that 2 week point, Ketch, we're talking about, the first couple of weeks of training camp is a little bit of the audition. The last 2 weeks is focusing and zoning in on the season opener. So the teaching portion is usually gone by that point. So you're really talking about a small window of teaching and developing. You basically have to hope they're ready-made. Like you have to hope they come in, can hit the ground running. It don't need a lot of instruction. So, you know, if you tell me you can hit on one, I would say, okay, that's good.
That's a
good.
win, a normal circumstance.
Yes, like one offensive lineman who could start as a freshman, I would say, man, that's great. If you're saying you need two, that's asking a lot. And it's not a reflection of those young men. It's just understanding the position.
Yeah.
You know, it's easier for a skill position person to come in at a receiver, at a running back, and kind of hit the ground running than that position that's technical. So to your point, Ketch, they're putting a lot, the staff is putting a lot on, he's talked about like, basically he's got guys coming. And to your point, that's good that reinforcements are coming. I don't know if there's enough time to really turn it around. To your point, the last thing I'll say, so we can get to your other points, this might be something that once you get past OU and you get into like the latter part of the season, maybe then it starts to grow and develop. But even if you put these guys out there and in week 2 they face Bama, it's going to be a learning lesson. It's going to be tough. You got to hope that they get better as the season goes along.
I think you nailed it right in the very opening statement, which was it's a tough ask. It's not an impossible ask, right? I mean, it's not turning water into wine, but it is a tough ask. And the thing is, it's not that they need bodies. They do need bodies for depth. But when you look at the starting offensive line, they need quality. And I think one of my biggest disappointments of spring ball is that I think it's becoming clear that Junior Angelau and Jake Majors might not ever, when guys play young, you think, God, in 4 years, all this young play is going to end up being, they're going to be all Americans because of the development. And sometimes but it always felt like he was kind of as good as he was as a freshman all the way through the end of his career. And he had a cup of coffee in the NFL with the Eagles, if I'm not mistaken, at least on a practice squad. So there's a level of play there that was okay. Zach Shackelford's another one, right? Where it's like, and that is who actually I think Majors profiles a little bit for, is a guy that when he's a senior, I wonder if we're going to be talking about how smart he is and how he's the quarterback of the offensive line, but not talking about how he physically is an ass kicker. And this team just lacks guys like that. And that's where these freshmen almost are needed more than anything else. It's like, who are your best players going to be? And I'm not so sure it's not Hayden Connor at this point. And I just don't know what that means. But yes, quarterbacks, you need a couple of offensive linemen. This third one, I think Texas fans can feel pretty good about. Got to find a pass rush. And ladies and gentlemen, I think barring something completely unforeseen, Ochaun Mathis, TCU transfer, is likely on the way. I think he's a big building block for this thing that we're talking about in terms of they got to find somebody who can consistently get to the quarterback. Mathis at least gives them a viable answer of a possibility that doesn't completely lean on all of the same guys who couldn't do it a year ago, suddenly finding the light switch and doing it this year. So of all of the things that we've talked about, this is one that I think Texas, I can close my eyes and see Texas being better here with the addition of Ochaun Mathis and just a little bit of involvement in the rest of the roster.
It's funny when I smiled so much because I feel like whenever we've done our live shows and we mentioned Mathis's name, all of a sudden Ochaun Mathis pops up in the chat. So it's weird when we're taping. I'm like, where is she? I know she's around here somewhere.
Oh, she's out there somewhere.
She's just quickly becoming our favorite mom. But shout out to all the other moms. But yeah, I mean, Ketch, what you're talking about is a guy that we know, to your point, has at least done it, right? What we're talking about for some of the other guys is the hopes and projections that maybe it does happen. What you said before, I just like to piggyback on, because there's always this belief that by the time a person becomes a senior, they become great and better. It's like, that's just not how it works. Like sometimes guys play for 4 years and they are just the same guys for 4 years. So, you can't always just say, well, this is a, older team. Sometimes older doesn't necessarily mean better, but at least in the case of Ochaun, he has the capabilities of doing it. You've seen it before. And so for a team that desperately needs a pass rush, that struggled so much to get to the quarterback, I always feel Ketch, it was almost unfair to judge the DBs last year, because when it's 7 Mississippi and you're still out there running, it's like, come on, man. Like, you got to give me a shot. Like, give me a shot to play some man coverage here.
Hey, I felt bad for Jameer Johnson on Saturday night on that deep ball from Ewers to Nayor. Johnson must have been like, how far do I have to run with this dude across the entire field before the play's over? Like, help me out a little bit.
Yeah, it was unfair. So, you bring in a guy like Mathis that could potentially get to the quarterback. And, Ketch, we saw last year, we saw backups having success, and not getting touched. Backup quarterbacks, rather, in having success and not getting touched by this defensive line. Having a guy like Mathis, if he commits, which the plan is on Saturday, according to his the video that he released, if he commits to Texas, I think, I'll stand by it. I think it becomes a potential game changer on defense.
Well, look, he had, by his own standards, Ochaun Mathis, that is, a disappointing season a year ago. He only had 4 sacks. That was after having 9 in 10 games the season before. And really, he was probably the best defensive lineman in the conference 2 years ago. He shows up with 4 from last season. This goes into point number 4.
He shows up with 4, Ketch. He's doubling what most guys did last year.
So the fourth thing that Texas has to do, and this piggybacks a little bit on the pass rush, but it's not just that. They got to find some playmakers on defense. These stats that I put in my column really speak to, I think, when I talk about eyeballing the team. So DeMarvion Overshown and Ovio Gofu are the top 2 returning sack guys in the program. They had 2 last year each. When you talk about returning interception leaders from a year ago, Luke Brockermeyer is the returning interception leader in the program with 2. And Texas, I think players and coaches hope he doesn't have to play so much that he gets 2 this year. If you take him out of the equation, Sean Jamison had 1, and that's it. 1! Your leading interception returner had 1 a year ago. No player on the roster forced more than a single fumble a year ago and is coming back. Alfred Collins, it leads all returning players with quarterback hits with 4. None of this is good enough. We're speaking about playmaking at every level of the defense. That's basically the minimum number you can have to have a number, right? I mean, you're almost got a bunch of guys that just didn't produce at all. And, the thing in the Big 12 is you don't have to play great defense, but it helps to have an opportunistic defense. And that's really how Oklahoma State has gotten by under Mike Gundy for so many years. They're almost never among the nation leaders in yards per game. They'll give up some points, but they'll create turnovers. And if you have a good offense and your defense gives you extra possessions, you typically win a lot of games. The problem a year ago wasn't that Texas was bad on defense, is that they were bad on defense and never great at once or twice a game in a way that truly helped the team towards a victory. I mean, literally at every level, it has to change. The defense just can't be okay. They've got to be, there has to be some guys on there that you can lean on to make a play on 3rd and 8. And it can't just be incoming Ochaun Mathis. It has to be some other dudes as well. Not an impossibility. I don't even know that this is a tough ask. These dudes just got to, these guys have talent. Deshaun Jameson has talent. Ovio Gofu, DeMarvion, they all have talent. It's about those guys applying their talent in ways. And we'll get to another. Maybe that's a lot to do with the coaches putting them into a position to get the most out of their talent. It felt like the opposite happened a year ago, and that can't happen in 2022.
Yeah, and Ketch, one of the things as I was looking up while you were talking, one of the things like Sarkisian had recently discussed about when he talked about the defense is, wanting to improve on the run defense, because as I looked at, they were ranked 8th against the run last year. So we're talking about guys that were gashing, and I'll have to look up, I'll find it in a second. As far as like third down, let me look up opponent third down conversions. They were ranked 7th in the conference as far as opponent third down conversion. And
that was one of their better defensive stats.
Yeah, exactly. But that was still a conversion rate of 42%. So, come on, that's four out of 10 times they're getting a first down. So being able to get off the field, to your point, whether it's on third down, being able to stop the run on the early downs, to your point, they need to be playmakers. You got to be, because I always say, you got to be good at something, right? If no matter what, like if you play basketball, you got to be at least a good shooter. If you're not a good shooter, be at least a good defender, but be good at something. But if you're not good at it or excelling at one, it makes it problematic. Texas has got to find an identity, Catch, on defense where you can say you're at least good at this. Like, we're going to stop you on first and second, and then we're just going to hope for the best on third down. Or to your point, Catch, we're going to be the team that's ball hawks, and they're going to get a bunch of interceptions, but you can't give up the yards on the run. You can't give up the pass. You not go off the field on third down. Like, you've got to be good at something. I think that's the next step, Catch. If they can start to become good at something, excel at something, to your point, find playmakers on defense. The guys that, Catch, we've seen flash. Catch, we thought Alfred Collins was going to be a star as a freshman. Just a star. You just thought to yourself, man, it's undeniable what it was going to be. We thought Deshaun Jameson had star-making capability. We've seen a lot of guys who we've seen flashes. If they can start to say, okay, this is who they are from week 1 to week 12, then we're talking about Arlington.